Welcome once again, dear listeners, to another episode of the Fenix Podcast. So, as of now, I am going to be doing a solo reading of one of my articles that I've posted on my blog. It's called What Am I Teaching? And as I mentioned on the first episode in Tiruvannamalai, I was going to start off by doing readings of my articles because we had established that it's not entirely convenient for people to sit down and focus all of their attention on a piece of reading, and they can't do anything else as a form of digesting or receiving new information. Nowadays, there's so many resources, and this podcast, or I guess podcasts themselves, offer this resource where you could be doing other maybe tasks that you can do without paying much attention to, like washing the dishes or cleaning the floor or maybe cooking something. All of these tasks that, usually we put music on, but we have the option of now putting on a podcast episode and listening to one of our idols or somebody with a lot of experience on a subject. So I have benefited enormously from that. So I'm kind of continuing that paying it forward to other people who might want to hear the information that I've come across or the stuff that I'm writing about. Some people have called to my attention that in the videos, I am looking somewhere else instead of at the camera. And yeah, that's because I've been writing for many years. I consider myself a writer. It's what I'm wanting to do for a living. So writing is the main focus. Okay, so that's why I'm reading instead of just improvising on camera. There will be episodes where I'll be improvising, and most of the stuff that I do with guests will be more improvisational. But these episodes, specifically, I wanted to read and interpret a little bit. So I'll jump in between the readings and maybe expand on something I would like to expand on. So with no further ado, this is called What Am I Teaching? It says, a question I've decided to delve into for the sake of better informing myself of my intentions and purpose behind what I do. Now, at the onset of this inquiry, I find it crucial to point out that any answer will originate from the fact that yoga is a process and not a result. Nowadays, I've learned that yoga can be both a process and a result, but for the sake of this reading, let's focus on the process aspect of yoga and not on the result, because this is a point that I'm going to be making throughout the entire reading, or that I'm going to be coming back to. Yoga is a process and not a result. It is inherently a practice, and as such implies that only in the doing rather than the culminating is where such a process can take place. If then there is no destination to the practice of yoga, no journey's end, what use is there for a guide? Okay, so this is an interesting question, because if there is no destination, there's no point that we're trying to get to, why would I need a guide to get me to that place? When we go hiking to a place that maybe we don't know, we can hire a guide, and that guide will take us from the beginning of the hike to the end of the hike, and we can be assured of that. But if yoga is only a process and we're not trying to get anywhere, then why would I need a guide? So from this seemingly paradoxical standpoint, I can begin to address the content of my original question. What am I teaching? Well, Teachers of yoga are not designated to guide anyone anywhere. They're not meant to take a student from point A to point B. This erroneous supposition of a teacher's role is what creates unnecessary degrees of submissiveness on behalf of students, and moreover, lends itself to the rise of hierarchical power structures that distort the nature of the work being done through practice. A teacher's role is instead to convey to any given student the magnitude and potentiality of the present moment exactly as it is. So I'll make a pause here and jump into this paragraph because I think there's a lot of embedded information in this paragraph that I would like to kind of decode. Right? Because what I'm saying is teachers of yoga are not supposed to guide anyone anywhere, like I mentioned, right? In the case of the hiking, we're not hiring a guide to take us from point A to point B. And it's this assumption of a teacher's role, this idea that students will come into a classroom setting thinking that this teacher of yoga is going to take us somewhere, is inherently giving the teacher the responsibility of the person's experience, right? Instead of a student coming into a class completely open and assuming responsibility for their own learning experience, they're giving it to the teacher. The teacher is the one responsible to have me achieve something or get somewhere or get something from this practice, right? Where we want the idea to be reversed. We want the students to be taken, and I'll refer to myself as a student in this case. I want to assume the responsibility of my learning experience. That way, whatever the teacher does, I am learning from it, right? If the teacher does something that I interpret as negative or as bad, right? From this frame of mind of good and bad, it runs contrary to my values. It threatens my sense of identity. So I am adverse to I have an aversion to what he or she is teaching. And that causes me a bad experience. And so I decide to stop practicing because this teacher did this thing to me. Whereas if I had been assuming responsibility for my learning experience, that teacher would have done something, and it could be more like an observation, like, oh, okay, so this person is a human being, did this imperfect thing or this thing that maybe I don't agree with at this moment of my life. Maybe later I will, or maybe never. But just that receptivity of, and that openness of taking responsibility for your emotions, for your feelings inside of the classroom setting and even outside. You know, it's kind of comes with this idea of bringing a teacher down from a pedestal. And I had been thinking about that a lot because I had been teaching, and I've been teaching for several years this method, and this whole topic of the abuses of Patabi joys had come out, and so it felt like as a whole the Ashtanga Yoga community, the modern Ashtanga Yoga community, was kind of running around and trying to rearrange itself or make sense of everything that's happening. And I'm not the only one to say this, but this topic of the hierarchical structure of any yoga methodology, because it doesn't only happen in Ashtanga, it happened in Vini Yoga as well with Desikachar's son. It happened in the Bikram traditions. There's many traditions and lineages that have experienced this shattering of their structure because of what the leader has done. So there seems to be too much emphasis being put on the teachers, right? Rather than the students taking responsibility for their learning experience. And whenever we take responsibility as students, we actually have more liberty, we have more freedom, and we have more space between what is being done and what I'm sensing of it, what I'm digesting of it. Because I can see things with a little bit more detachment rather than if I'm idealizing some teacher. It creates this kind of goggle where I see them maybe as a rock star or a celebrity or something, and I can't see them as a human. So if there is no empathy, this connection between two humans, rather it's more like an authority figure and the student role, right? This idea that teachers are up here and students are down here is what I'm trying to kind of shake, and what I think, along with a lot of other people who have written and spoken about this, is one of the main problems in this hierarchical model of teaching yoga. So I'll continue. That was a pretty big parenthesis. Sorry if I just rambled on a bit, but it's an interesting topic and one that I'm sure is going to continue to be spoken of for the next year, 2020, maybe the next couple. There's so many changes happening now in the yoga scene and yoga industry, which are really interesting to kind of keep up with. But for the sake of this reading, of this article, of this writing, let's leave it at that and continue diving into these words. So to induce a direct personal experience of the present moment, the yoga system that I teach harnesses the power of three primary sources of consciously directable energy. Okay, I'll repeat that. The yoga system that I teach harnesses the power of three primary sources of consciously directable energy. Okay, this is what is known as Trishtana method, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Breath, gaze, and posture. Okay, so what do I mean by consciously directable energy? That sounds kind of ethereal. It sounds kind of, when it sounds like I'm trying to use these fancy words, but I thought long and hard about them, and these are the most accurate ones that I could find, maybe, at this point. Consciously directable energy. So energy that I can direct through the use of my consciousness or my awareness. It's funny, in Spanish, the word for conscious, for consciously, has no direct translation. It translates directly to aware. So it's a little bit tricky when I'm translating these articles because, in English there's consciousness and there's awareness. Now, if we really think about it, what is the difference? In Spanish, I use the same terms interchangeably because, like I mentioned, there is no direct translation for consciously. So, sources of energy, breath. Let's start with breath. So, I'm breathing right now. It's a function of my autonomous nervous system. It's responsible for having the breath happen, for keeping me alive. I'm not thinking about breathing, but I can think about breathing. So that's where consciousness comes in. Through my consciousness, I can direct my attention to the source of energy, which is the breath. I can make my inhalation slower. I can make it longer. I can do the same with my exhalation. I can make my breathing fast. I can make it slow. I can regulate my breathing. That's what I mean by a source of energy that you can consciously direct. Okay, so the same as the breath, the gaze, number 2, is the same. It's an autonomous function. If I have my eyes open, I'm looking, but I can decide, I can choose where to look. Right now, I'm choosing to look into the camera, into you guys, at you guys. Now I'm choosing to look at the text because I want to see what I'm reading. So that's what I'm saying. I can consciously direct the source of energy. In day-to-day life, our vision is going everywhere from one place to the other, digesting a lot of information. The methodology that I'm teaching, which is the modern Ashtanga methodology, uses the gaze as a very important pillar of the practice. Direct your gaze at one point. Focus your vision on one point of attention. So let's go on to the third, the posture. So again, it's something that can either be happening or not happening. It's something that I can be choosing to do or not choosing to do right now. If you're looking at this, I am seated on a red sofa and I'm holding my body upright because this is a posture where I feel more engaged, where I can talk more comfortably, where I'm breathing adequately, where I can project my voice more. So I'm choosing to adopt this posture. But if I didn't choose to, I can just release all my efforts and slop down into the couch and just lay down completely. So I have the choice of how I use my body, how I align it, how I position it. And that's where the postures come in. So right now I'm choosing a seated posture, but there's a lot of postures in yoga asana practice. So we went through the three: breath, gaze, and posture. So the practical application of these three tools to cultivate intentional awareness is all I can say I teach and what I hold practitioners accountable for under a class setting. The Ashtanga yoga system organizes these tools and puts them forth in a precisely elaborated set of series. This creates an accessible framework that facilitates the transmission of the technique to anyone seeking to learn it. This is the framework that I use to teach. So I'm going to make a pause here. We have the three primary sources of directable energy: breath, gaze, and posture. What I'm saying here is that this modern Ashtanga yoga system consolidates all three of them, organizes them in a certain way that creates this framework, this map. And this map is something that I can reference. It's something tangible that I have, right? Because there's also this belief that yoga is this ethereal or this mystical thing or this mystical experience, and that yoga teachers are somehow these mystical beings. And yoga teachers are not mystical beings, they're humans. And in the case of what I'm teaching, what I'm leveraging off of this system is this Trishtana method, these three tools that I have, which create this map that I can then apply to other people in their own unique way. So that's what I find so fascinating about this method and why I continue to practice and to teach it. So this map that I have, I can say to somebody, okay, look, breathe in this way, look at this point, and try this posture. Try it out. Okay? In the trying, just try it. And by trying it, they then have, the student has a direct, personally relatable experience of the method or of yoga. It could be a direct experience of yoga. It could be a direct experience of concentration. It could be a direct experience of introspection, of introversion. It can be a direct something different that they maybe were not feeling in the rest of their lives, right? This framework is something, it's like a medicine. It's like I have these recipes, these ingredients that I have to prepare in a certain way, and then maybe I have to cook them, or maybe I have to boil them, right? So with this framework, you can essentially teach it to a student and then have them practice it on their own. That's what's so fascinating about it, because that metaphor of give a man a fish and he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for the rest of his life. So coming back to the concept of the medicine, we're teaching people how to make their own medicine. We tell them, look, this is the recipe, these are the ingredients, these are the methods of preparation, these are the tools you're gonna need. All right, and you will need this dose. You need precisely this dose right now. Try it out, see how it feels, and we'll go from there. Because it's always a feedback process. It's not like the teacher is telling a student what to do. A teacher is giving suggestions, and based on the feedback that he or she gets from the student, then the relationship continues and the learning experience continues, both taking responsibility for their processes. The student taking responsibility in a way that he or she can be honest about what they're going through, whether there's pain, whether there's something that doesn't feel right for them. Right? If the more honest they are with themselves, the easier it is for them to communicate these things. The more they're idealizing the teacher and thinking like, no, this teacher knows more than me, right? This teacher has more experience, so this teacher is more elevated. This teacher has accomplished all of these things that we attribute to teachers. Then I won't feel comfortable speaking up because I think this teacher knows more than me. And that becomes a problem, because maybe this teacher isn't even portraying this kind of image, but us as students, we are projecting from who knows where, from what place, in our mind, in our upbringing, in just life that has somehow created this image of authority figures in this way, in this particular context, that we choose to do that. There's so many reasons that can be attributed to it. It's not the subject of this entry, but it is a good thing to think about and to just kind of poke a little bit. So I'll continue the reading. So within this framework that I've been talking about lies a universe of variabilities, accounting for the fact that every person, and moreover, every moment of every person's life, is unique. So I kind of brushed on this previously by saying that you give the person the medicine that is unique to them. So we want to take into account that every person is different. But on top of that, every moment of every person's life is different. So I'm not the same now in January 2020 that I'm going to be on April of 2020. Nobody is. We might have changes in our families, or injuries in our bodies, or experiences, or a promotion, or we get fired. There can be so many things happening in our lives that influence the practice. So as a teacher, I'm kind of looking into what the person's body is telling me, because the body is communicating everything. The body, the posture, the breath, whether there's trembling, whether there's effort, whether there's trying, whether there's ambition, whether there's worry, whether there's anxiety. It's easy to see through the body of somebody. So all of these years have kind of developed the ability to read people on a level that's nonverbal. And that's something that has been a little bit unexpected, that has just come about as a result of teaching and probably practicing, because I can see these things in my own body. Sometimes my body behaves in ways that I wouldn't want it to. It reveals things about me that I don't necessarily want it to. So that's also a very interesting thing. But then as a teacher, you're looking at what's happening in the bodies and what that's communicating to you. What is this person going through? We don't try to make assumptions, but we can take into account what we're seeing. And then maybe that day do a little change in the dose of the medicine, right? So what I'm trying to say is, Ashtanga, modern Ashtanga yoga has this image of it being very rigid and very strict. And I don't resonate with this rigidity. I've had teachers that have this paradigm, and I've learned a lot from them. But, as unique individuals that we are, that's just not my take on practice. So I believe more in this flexible approach, in this way that caters more to the student rather than to the method. So that's a good little transition into this last sentence. So although the method is deeply rooted in discipline and structure, it also allows for flexibility and innovation. So that's what I was saying. You have this framework, but within the framework lies a universe of variabilities. So although it's deeply rooted in discipline and structure, it also allows for flexibility and innovation. What is taught is under the context of self-practice. That is, students are taught to practice for themselves. They are not led through the entirety of each class. Instead, they are individually given the tools that are adequate for them progressively throughout time. So they're learning little by little. This is another good parenthesis to do here. As a new student, you're entering into the yoga class and you see everybody's doing their practice and you're thinking, man, what the hell did I just get myself into? These people already know what they're doing. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. This yoga is for experienced people. So all of these insecurities start rising to the surface. So what happens in that scenario is that the teacher, who has already been teaching all of these people throughout time, maybe for weeks, maybe for months, maybe for years. So all these people already know their medicine. They're applying it to themselves, and the teacher is there just facilitating here or there, maybe verbally or physically, on wherever is appropriate, because it's not always necessary to affect another person's practice or to go into it or to adjust in any way. Sometimes you just let them do their thing because they got it and they're digesting it. They're going through it internally. The yoga process is happening in their bodies, and you don't want to disturb that. So a new student comes in, the teacher will go to this new student and then dedicate all their attention on this new person. And that person will learn Surya Namaskar A, the sun salutation, the beginning of the sequence, which combines the breathing, the gazing, and the postures, right? This is the good base to understand. The Surya Namaskar has everything, has a whole practice ingrained into it. So you start off with that, and of course, tailored to that person. Because the same Surya Namaskar that I teach an 18-year-old athlete who is doing sports for a living is not the same one I'm going to teach maybe a 60-year-old person who retired from working a corporate job all of his life, right? And he's coming into yoga in a completely different phase of his life. So this is where the practice gets really fascinating, where you can apply these tools to such different people and see the results happening, see the internal experiences happening, which then begin to trigger external changes, but that's a whole other subject. So that's what I mean. And then that day, they will go home. They will learn Surya Namaskar A, and that's it, right? So this is very different to, I guess, the more common approach to yoga classes, yoga studios, where a teacher is guiding students throughout the entire class. Right from the beginning, the teacher begins speaking and the students begin following all throughout maybe the 60 or 90 minutes duration of the class. In this case, it's not like that. Maybe your first class could be 30 minutes. Maybe your first class could be 45 minutes. Depends on how well the student is digesting these indications, these new movements, these new breathing patterns, this new form of concentration. It can be a lot. So that's why we go at it little by little. The first class Surya Namaskar only. Maybe the first 3 classes Surya Namaskar. Maybe that for some people it could be that. Maybe for other people it's the first class Surya Namaskar A, the second class Surya Namaskar B, which is the next sequence. Third class you start getting into the standing sequence, and like that. Little by little you add into it. That's what I mean by progressively and then throughout time. So this is a long-term endeavor, a long-term project. It is not expected that they learn everything in the first class. It is not expected that they do the work perfectly. They just have to try. Go through the process, leading back to the place this line of inquiry began from. Yoga is a process and not an end result. A teacher then simply sustains the conditions through which that process unfolds. Teacher is just holding the space, sustaining the conditions through which that process unfolds. So I'll leave it at that. I think that's a good ending point. I want to thank you for tuning in, for being here, for listening, or for watching. And I will see you next time.